What's going on, guys? Welcome back to another Swift video. In today's video, we're going to be building out a news application that incorporates a API call. You're going to actually be able to pass in the country for which you want news back. We'll talk about building the UI and caching these images, as well as being able to open up these stories right in your application. So I will have a part 2 up as well for adding search functionality, so stay tuned for that. But if any of this sounds good to you, make sure you start by destroying the like button down below. Hit subscribe if you're into iOS and Swift. That all said, let's get into the video. Alright, we're going to begin by opening up Xcode and creating a new project. We're going to stick with the app template under iOS, and let's go ahead and give this project an app name of News App. Make sure your language is set to Swift, your lifecycle is UI Kit, and your interface is Storyboard. Will work programmatically, but no Swift UI today. Go ahead and create the app, and first things first, we are going to expand our window and close up this right panel, and then we'll also jump into the view controller. I'm going to select a simulator from the list up here, and maybe we'll go with the 12 Pro Max. And first things first, we want to go ahead and add a title here. I'll go ahead and call it news. I'm also going to set a background color here, and this is going to be system background, just like that. Let's go ahead and give this a run in the simulator just to load up our application before we go and build out a API to get news and searching and all that good stuff you saw in the beginning. So here is our app running. The next thing we're going to do is we want to embed this in a navigation controller so we get the title up here. Now we can do that programmatically, but it's the only thing we'll do through the storyboard. For the sake of time, we'll go ahead and select the controller in here. In the editor, we'll go to, rather in the toolbar, we'll go to editor and then embed in navigation controller. We can then select the navigation bar here, and in the attributes inspector, we can open up the prefers large title checkbox and just check it. And then we can jump back to our view controller. So once we have this set up here, if we think about it at a high level, what are the pieces that we need? So we're going to want a table view to go ahead and show our news stories. We'll want a custom cell. We'll want a way to call the API. And we want a way to open the news story and search for news stories. So it sounds like a lot, but a lot of this stuff overlaps. So let's do this one by one. So first things first, I've got my browser opened up here. The website is newsapi.org, and they've got a free API, so you can get a free API key. And here is the first URL we're going to bring in. It gives you top headlines in a given country. I've got US in the URL already. So I'm just going to copy that, and we're going to create a new object in here. Maybe we can call it API caller. And this is the object, as the name implies, that will be responsible for hitting our API and giving us back some data. So we'll create a class in here called API caller. There's going to be a private initializer. Since we're going to go ahead and create this as a singleton, so we'll go ahead and say static let shared API caller. Now what we want to go ahead and do is I'm going to define some constants in here, so we can say struct constants, and this is going to be a top headlines URL. And we can go ahead and say this is a URL string, and I'm just going to paste in that string that I copied for the URL. Then we want to actually create some functions on here we can call. So the first one is going to be func get top stories, and it's going to have a completion handler, which gives us back a result with a array. If successful, of our news objects. We're just going to stick string in there for now since we have not created the model yet. And in here, we want to basically perform an API call. So the first thing we want to do is unwrap the constants.top headline URL. The reason we need to bind it is because the URL initializer is optional. Now, once we've gone ahead and done that, we can create a URL session shared.data task with a URL and a completion handler. So we'll use this one here, pass in the URL, and we've got a completion handler here. So there is our data, our response, which we don't care about, and we probably want to make sure we don't have an error. So we're going to say if let error equals a error, we know something went wrong. So in the completion, we can say go ahead and say failure. Else if let data equals data, we know we got some data back. So now what we want to do is basically try to decode using a JSON decoder the particular piece of information from the data. Now we want to create an actual model first. I'm just going to say string.self. We'll change this in a moment. We'll also want to catch if an error does occur. So we'll say failure here for the error. So I know I'm going pretty quickly. I will explain everything once we kind of get to a good middle stopping point. But once we have this task created, don't forget to say task.resume. Now we want to create some models. So I'm going to stick the models right down here. And if we take a look at our response here, we can see the one that we care about in the response is this articles key, which points to an array of these article objects. So we want to basically create a response here. So I'm going to first say this is a API response, which is codable. It's going to have a articles key in it to make sure it's spelled correctly. And it's going to be of type article. And we'll create an article right below it. And this article will also be codable. And inside of here, we're going to stick all the inner keys. So if we open up one of these, we can see we've got a source. We've got an author. There's quite a few things in here. So I'll create a source. Maybe we don't care about the author, but we definitely want the title, description, and URL to image. So we'll say this should have a title, should have a description. Absolutely it should, so we can show something. Should have a URL, which will be a string, and it should have a URL to image is what I believe it was. And all of these, I believe we saw were strings. So that's looking good. We might want to grab this published at also, which is a date time string. So we can go ahead and grab that as well if we wanted to display that. And for the source here, what we want to do is we want to create another object because it's a dictionary here. So we'll go ahead and say source is going to be a source. So we'll say source is of type source. And then down here, we can say struct source is also codable. And the only thing I care about in here is the name. We can exclude the ID. And now what we're going to say is the result that we should get back that we're trying to decode is a API response. So what we'll go ahead and do here is I'm going to print out results.articles.count, and we'll make sure we got some articles back. And if we do, we know that this is all working. So before we give this a run to make sure that our API call works, at the bottom of view did load, in our controller, we can say API caller shared, and there's a single function on here. And we'll go ahead and give it a run. So go ahead and give it a run, and we expect to see a print statement in our console, assuming I didn't make any typos. So let's see what's going on down here. Looks like we don't see it. So that leads me to believe we have an error. So we're going to switch on the result here. In the success case, we should have a response. We'll break. And in the failure case, we should have an error, in which case we will print the error here so we actually know what has gone wrong. So go ahead and give that a run. And here we can see that we have an issue. Index 6 int value. Let's see, found null instead. So it looks like it's trying to find a string value. Let's see what it's for. It's for articles. Article int value nil. So let's see what I botched in our models here. Something is screwed up clearly. So we have articles. Let me make sure I spelt that right. It looks good to me, which is an array of article objects, articles, which looks good. Now we've got a title, description, URL to image. So let's see what else is going on in here. So we've got a title, description, URL to image. So all of this is looking good. So what I'll do is I'm just going to comment out, we'll comment out some of these properties, and that way we'll be able to more quickly narrow down what is actually screwing this up. So it looks like we've got 20 articles now, so something is screwing this up. So let's uncomment all of this and we'll find out if the ID is the thing that's messing all of this up. So it looks like it's not, something else is screwing it up here. So we'll go ahead and let's see, these ones should be good. So let's go ahead and try getting the URL and URL to image. Looks like one of those is in fact the problem. So let's go ahead and try it with just a source. Perhaps the source is the problem. All right, so source isn't the problem. Let's check our description here. Maybe that is the problem. And there's obviously better ways to debug this. I'm being slightly lazy, but let's see what's going on. It's saying articles int value is nil, index 5. Int value is 5 for the coding key string value for description. So what we could actually go ahead and do is we can make this optional. It looks like description could be a string or an integer per the error, but it looks like if we make it optional, it actually doesn't yell at us, which is good enough for our example today. So we'll do the same thing for these here as well. We'll make these optional as well. I don't think we should change publish to @ but let's go ahead and make sure it's not yelling at us. All right, looking pretty good. So now that we're getting our top headlines back in our controller, we want to actually render these in a table view. So that requires us to create a table view. So let's go ahead and do that. So we'll go ahead and say private let table view is going to be of type UI table view, and we're going to create it in the anonymous closure pattern here. We're going to want to register a cell to it as well. We have not created it yet, but we will momentarily. But for now, just go ahead and just register the standard base class for the cell. We want to make sure we add this as a sub view. So there's our table view. And we also want to go ahead and assign the delegate and data source for this table view. We'll want to go ahead and conform to both protocols. And I'm going to stick all the table view functions down here so it's nice and organized. So we'll say number of rows. By default will be 0. We'll change that momentarily with view models that we want cell for row at index path. And in here, we want to go ahead and dequeue a reusable cell with a ID of cell, which is what we registered for the given index path. And I'm just going to line break all this stuff so it's a little cleaner here. We'll want to go ahead and return the cell, and I'm just going to go ahead and assign its text to something random here. And we're also going to want to be able to select each of these cells. So we'll say did select row at index path, and we'll want to deselect it as well. So these are the bare bones of our table view. So let's see why this is yelling at me. This should be deselect, not delete. Deselect row at index path. All right, so that's looking good. We want to make sure we give our table view a frame. So let's go ahead and override view did layout sub views. We'll say the frame is view.bounds. So looking pretty good there. And let's see, we want a custom cell like I mentioned. But before we do that, let's actually do that first. So it'll probably help a little bit in explaining all of this. So we'll create a new file here. It's going to be a Cocoa Touch subclass of a UI table view cell. We'll call it news table view cell. Go ahead and create it and start by deleting all the stuff that it gives you in here. The first thing we want in here is a static identifier that we're going to use to, just register our cell to the table. We'll want to override the initializer here for the table view. We'll also want to bring in the required initializer, so you can go ahead and autocomplete will help you out there. We'll want to layout our sub views. We'll also want to go ahead and prepare the cell for reuse by overriding the related function. And finally, we're going to want a way to configure this cell or each of the cells with a view model. Now, what is this view model going to be? Well, we're going to take this and I'm going to stick a view model right up here. It's going to be a class instead of a struct, since we're going to want to change some stuff on it since it's a reference type. It's going to have a title. It's going to have a subtitle. And it'll also have a image URL, which will be of type URL optional. And it'll also have some image data that we're going to use to cache basically data after we've downloaded the image, so we don't have to download it over and over again. So we'll go ahead and create an initializer here for it. So let me just line break all this good stuff so we have a little bit cleaner code. So we'll go ahead and do that. I'll also bring in the image URL, and I'll bring in the image data here. All right. Now we want the body, self.title equals title, self.subtitle is subtitle, self.image URL will be image URL, and self.image data will be image data. You actually don't even need to assign that one since it's going to start off as nil anyways, so we can actually get rid of this here and just say by default this is going to be nil, which is actually the default in general. You can just type it for explicit typing, but it's not per se necessary. So let's see, we can get rid of this comma here. And let's see what else this is yelling about. That error will go away. And down here we can say this will configure with this view model. Now we're going to want to configure this in a moment, but let's create the sub views in here. So we'll go ahead and say that we want a news title label, which is going to be a UI label here. And we're just going to create a label in here, and maybe I'll make the font size a little larger since, you know, it is a title in fact. So we'll say label font size will be system font of size and weight. Maybe we'll say 24, weight we'll say maybe medium. And I'm just going to go ahead and copy and paste this. And the next one here will be the subtitle label. Only thing that's different here is the weight will be regular and the size will be perhaps 18. And then we also finally want a image view here. So I'll go ahead and call this news image view. This is going to be a UI image view, and we basically don't want much in here. Maybe we'll set a background color just to start off so we can actually see, you know, where our image views frame is. So we'll say background color is maybe system red. Pick whatever color you want, really doesn't matter. We also are going to assign its content mode to be scale aspect fill, so the image keeps its aspect ratio but fills the image view. Let's go ahead and add all of these subviews to our content view. So we'll say content view. Let's see what's going on. Looks like we forgot to line break correctly. So content view, add subview, subtitle view. Man, my typos today are not ideal. Subtitle label, that's what I'm looking for. Content view, finally add subview for our image view here, which is our news image view. This one should be our news title label. And let's see, so before we go ahead and continue here in the configure function, we're going to say news title labels text is going to be view model dot title. The subtitle labels text is going to be view model dot description, perhaps dot let's see, subtitle is what we called it actually. And what else do we want here? Now we also want to configure the image, so we're going to say if we have data for the image, we'll say if let data is view model dot image data. We can go ahead and use that to assign the news image views image. We can say this is UI image with data like that. Otherwise, in the else here, we want to actually fetch the image. But before we do that, since we wrote out so much code already, let's go back to our controller and actually give this a run to see what we've got. So we want to register our new cell with its identifier back in the controller here. We also want to go ahead and dequeue the appropriate cell with the correct identifier. We're going to cast it here to the given cell. We'll make this a guard. And instead of doing this here, we're going to say cell.configure, and we're going to pass in a view model at the nth position. Now we don't have this array of view models yet, so let's come up here and create it. We'll say private var view models is an array of news table view cell view models. And basically the premise is once we get our result back here, we could actually go ahead and pull out view models from the articles. So this should give us articles back. And if we come back to our API caller, we'll adjust this function in the signature to give us an array of articles back. And instead of printing here, we can go ahead and say completion, and we can say success is result.articles. Back in the controller now, what we want to go ahead and do is from those articles, we're going to create our view models. So we'll go ahead and say weak self here, and we'll go ahead and say self.viewModels. View models is going to be articles.compactMap. We're going to convert each of these into a news table view cell view model. The title will be $0.title. The subtitle will be $0.description. And the image URL will be a URL with a string, which will be $0.URL to image. And since it's optional, we'll give it a default value of an empty string. So description here is also optional. So we'll say in a default value, no description, just like that. And we'll also go ahead and line break all of this just to make it look a little bit nicer. Let me move this parenthesis back up here since that's where it belongs. And once we've got our view models created, we should tell our table view to go ahead and refresh itself. So we're going to say self.tableview reload data. The number of rows will now be viewModels.count. And I promise now we'll go ahead and give it a run and let's see what happens. So bear with me here. We should be getting articles back. It looks like we have our title showing, but where the heck is our table view cells? Well, we're actually seeing them here. What's happening is we haven't actually laid out the subviews, so we don't actually see them. So what I'm going to go ahead and do, let's go ahead and go back to our table view cell, and let's start giving our subviews a frame. So in the layout subviews, we're going to say the news title labels frame will be CG-rect, and we're going to say this is maybe 5, 0, content view.frame.size.width, minus perhaps, I don't know, give it an arbitrary number. We'll say maybe 120. And the height here will be content view frame, and we're going to use its size height divided by 2. We'll actually bump the X to be 10. And if you might be wondering how I'm calculating this, it's all relative positioning. You could also use constraints if you so choose to, but we're just going to stick with this for now. And if we come back to our view controller, we want each of these cells to be a little taller than the standard height. So we're going to say a height for row at index path. And I'm going to go ahead and return maybe 150, so we end up getting a taller cell. So go ahead and do that, and boom, we've got our headers here, our headline titles, I should say. And what we want to then do is we want to add an image on the right-hand side, and we're going to add a description label right below this one here. So let's go ahead and do that. So let's come back to our table view cell. I'm actually going to copy and paste this so we can just do the subtitle right below it. So we'll go ahead and grab that and do that. And instead of having the width be minus 120, maybe I'll say minus 200. Same thing down here, just so we have a larger image view space. The thing that'll change here is the content views subtraction of the title label height. So this will be the subtitle label. This Y is going to maybe change to be 70. We'll change the height of this guy to be 70 here. And let's go ahead and add in our image views frame as well. So I'm going to copy and paste this, and this is going to turn into a news image view. The X is pretty simple. It's going to be content view dot frame size width, subtracting perhaps 200. And the width and height is going to be this. The width will be definitely 190. And the height is going to be the whole height of these cells. So maybe the height minus 10 will give it a 5-point margin at the top and bottom. So I'll make that 5. So keep in mind that we're not going to actually see the image yet because we're not downloading it down here, but we should see a color. So cool, we're definitely seeing a color. Image is kind of large, maybe 200 is a little aggressive. You might want to tone this down a little bit. Maybe we can make it like 170. This could also be 170, and the width, instead of being 200 or 190, we can make this 160. And this will, X will be subtracting maybe 170. And the other thing I forgot to do up here is on our labels, we're going to end up saying number of lines is going to be 0, so it goes ahead and line wraps. So go ahead and do that and give it a run once more, and let's see if it's looking any better. All right, much better. Our image view is touching our label. It doesn't look too hot, so let's go ahead and add a little spacing there. So we need to change the X of the image, so we'll say maybe subtracting 160, so there's a 10-point buffer between those elements. And I think this is looking a lot better. You might actually even want to do like 150. But before we run it again, let's actually go ahead and download our image. So else if let, we're going to make sure we have a URL. We'll say else if let URL is viewModel dot URL, or image URL, I should go ahead and say. If we have it, we can try to go ahead and download the image from it. So we'll say URL session shared data task with a URL and completion handler, basically what we did for our API call. We will validate that we don't have a error. So we'll say guard let data equals data. We do have data, and the error is in fact nil. And we'll return if such is not the case, aka we didn't successfully download the image. And if we did, on the main thread, we can go ahead and assign the news image views image. So we can actually take the same code up here and we can drop it down here, and we want to go ahead and say this is self optional so we don't cause a memory leak. So we'll capture weak self there. And on this whole thing, go ahead and say resume. Now we also want to cache the data that we got back here, so we can also go ahead and say self.viewModel, instead of self dot, just viewModel dot image data will be data. And the beauty here is the next time the cell comes into view, it's not going to actually go ahead and download the image again. So a couple issues I still see. The image view is getting clipped off the edges. So we are going to say this image view clips to bounds, so it stays within its boundary. And we'll also go ahead and get rid of the red background color. Maybe we'll make it something like system secondary, or we can say secondary system background. So it's like a nice light gray color. And we also never implemented this prepare for reuse. Basically in here, we just want to go ahead and nil out all of our properties that we assign between different cells. So we'll go ahead and get rid of the image. And I just realized that I spelt this incorrectly. So let's go ahead and just do a quick find and replace to fix up our spelling there, because we know how to spell on this channel. So let's go ahead and give it a run once more. And let's see what it looks like. So look at that. We've got a pretty full functioning news application. Now let's go ahead and hook up actually tapping on one of these articles and opening it up. So let's go ahead and jump into our view controller. It's pretty trivial to do this. We already have a function which gets basically which view model we have selected. So we can actually just pull that out here. We can say indexPath.row. Now the view model doesn't actually hold on to our URLs. So what we could do is we could hold on to the articles as well. So we'll say self optional articles is going to equal our articles here. And just like we have this array, we'll go ahead and create another one for articles of type array of article objects. And now down here, we can come and get the given article that we, went ahead and tapped on. Now from this article, we're going to grab the URL string. So we can try to say guard let URL is going to be the article.url, which is optional. So we'll go ahead and give it a default string value. And if we get the article, we're going to use a built-in mechanism, which is called a Safari controller, to go ahead and present the news article. So we'll import Safari services here. And down here, we're going to say let VC is SF Safari view controller with this URL being passed into its initializer. And finally, we'll say present this VC animated true. So let's go ahead and give this a run and see where we land. So we're going to go ahead and hopefully see all of our news stories, and this should work in both light mode and dark mode. So if I put it into dark mode here, you can see everything is still working. If I tap on this, you'll see it'll open up the news article, and boom, there it is. Texas judge blocks NBA or NRA rather from declaring bankruptcy. Very interesting. Totally random here. Now, this video has gotten way longer than I anticipated, so what I am going to go ahead and do is I might do a part 2, but before I do that, let's take care of the styling here. So the description is a little bolder than I think would look nice. So if we come back to the subtitle label here, let's go ahead and actually make its weight light, and I'll actually decrease its font size even a little more. And this part is, at this point, it's very subjective of how you want it to look. I would even argue that the font size of 25 here is big. We'll make this 22, and let's try semi-bold, and let's see what that looks like. Because you want a little bit of spacing between everything to have your, have some room for things to breathe. We can also add, some spacing on the right side of this image view and a nice corner radius. So for the image view's width, we can actually say this is 150 here. Since we are subtracting 150, we actually want 140. This will give it a 10-point buffer on the right. And I'll actually also give it a nice rounded corner. So I'm going to say the corner radius is perhaps, 6 or 7. Give it whatever you want, whatever looks nicest to you. And make sure you say masks to bounds is true. So go ahead and do that, and let's see what we're at. So this is what our app is looking like. I think it's looking pretty nifty. We can tap into any of these and read the articles, but we don't have a search functionality baked in here yet. It is pretty simple to add, but I think this video was fast enough, so I'm gonna probably drop it here, and I'll do a part 2 to add search. So yeah, I mean, just to do a quick recap, we've got a table view cell here, which really is pretty verbose, but all it has is 3 table view cell subviews for the 2 labels and the image. We've got a view model, which also holds our image view data and URL, and we cache it once it's downloaded, so it doesn't need to download again when I scroll the cell off screen, then come back. It uses the cached version. We've got an API caller, which is a singleton with a single URL request in here, a single network call to fetch top headlines in the US. We've also got our models defined in here for our response, article, and source. And finally, we've got our view controller here as well with our table view functions here, delegates and data source functions. Our pretty basic viewed load here, we can actually move this API call to its own function. We can say fetch top stories, and just to keep our code nice and modular, so we can say fetch top stories. And we'll go ahead and paste that in, sort of line break at least, paste that in like that. And yeah, that's basically our news app in a nutshell. So it looks like we have an issue now. What the heck did I break in the last 2 seconds? All right, let's try that one more time. Looks like a transient issue. Yep, looks like it went away and it succeeded. So yeah, that's all I've got for you guys today. If you haven't destroyed the like button already, make sure to do so. I know this video was a bit faster. I expected to do this and the search stuff in one sitting, which is why I was slightly rushing. But go back and see the parts that you might be confused about. Leave a comment if you have any questions. I'm going to take my time with part 2. I probably should have taken my time more so here as well, but I digress. If you enjoy iOS and Swift, subscribe to the channel. I try to post daily here, and we're growing this community together, so let's grow it together and continue onwards and upwards. So thanks again for watching. I'll see you in the next one.